The laughter was not loud, but it was cutting. She had not even made it to her seat when the whispers started. "She wore that?" someone muttered behind a raised champagne glass. "At a fashion gala?" Another voice chimed in. "I thought it was catering staff at first. All because of a dress. Simple, cream-colored, with no label anyone recognized. No glitter, no logo, just clean lines, soft fabric, and a confidence that didn't beg for attention." She smiled as she walked through the room, unaware of, or unmoved by, the snickers trailing behind her. The event was a who's who of fashion elites. Influencers, editors, designers, critics, people whose eyes scanned outfits before they looked at faces. And what they saw on her didn't impress them. They did not know her. They did not recognize her. And they certainly didn't realize that the dress they mocked had not only been custom-made, it had been designed by the very man who would arrive minutes later and leave them all stunned. Her husband, a billionaire, a design visionary, a man who rarely appeared in public, but when he did, fashion editors stood. And when he placed his hand on her shoulder and called her his greatest masterpiece, the room went silent. Because the dress they ridiculed was theirs to envy. Her name was Isla Monroe, a name few in the fashion world knew, and even fewer would recognize on a guest list. She had never walked a runway, never chased magazine features. She had no brand deals, no stylist, and no desire to be famous. She preferred morning markets over launch parties, bookstores over red carpets. And yet, here she was, standing among the world's most elite designers, influencers, and fashion editors at the annual Verité Vogue Gala, a high-fashion charity event known as much for its exclusivity as for its cold perfection. She did not belong, at least not in the way they measured it. No couture heels, no diamond earrings, no dress they could tag her to tweet about. But she was not here to impress anyone. She was here because her husband, Luca Monroe, had personally asked her to come. A creative genius turned fashion tech billionaire, Luca rarely attended these events despite being one of the most influential names in design. And when he did, he never brought anyone. Until tonight. When he handed her the dress earlier that day, he said only this: "Wear this. I made it for you. No one else in the world has anything like it." It was soft, elegant, effortlessly beautiful. Like her, Isla had smiled, touched that he had taken the time, never imagining that his quiet gift would spark judgment from strangers who couldn't see past their designer labels. From the moment she walked into the gala, she had felt the eyes. They scanned her, labeled her, dismissed her. A few complimented her, with that polite, hollow tone reserved for people who clearly tried. Others simply ignored her altogether. But what no one realized was that they were looking at a woman who lived with brilliance, who woke up next to the very mind the fashion world worshipped from afar. And the dress they laughed at was about to become the most talked-about design of the entire evening, not because of a label, but because of who had made it and who had worn it. "Do you think she knows where she is?" The question came from a woman draped in electric green couture, her heels sharper than her tone. She was speaking just loud enough to be heard, and just quiet enough to pretend it was not intentional. Her table-mate laughed softly, probably thought this was a fundraiser for a public library. From across the room, a fashion blogger angled her phone discreetly and snapped a photo. "No tags," she whispered to her assistant. "No idea who designed it. Maybe local or vintage thrift. Definitely not from anyone showing this season," the assistant replied with a smirk. Isla stood near a crystal drink table, unaware of how many phones had just captured her image for mockery, not admiration. She took a sip of water, scanning the room. No sign of Luca yet. He had told her he might be late. 10 minutes tops, he had said, smiling. That had been 20 minutes ago. Still, she waited, calm, content to simply be there. But the voices nearby were growing harder to ignore. "She's not even wearing heels. Does she think effortless means unpolished?" I love how she thought minimal was a strategy instead of just basic. The words floated like perfume, toxic and cloying, and yet Isla remained poised. What they did not know was that she had heard comments like these before, when she worked in nonprofit development and walked into corporate boardrooms wearing flat shoes and carrying grant applications. When she visited her husband's showroom during fittings and assistants assumed she was the delivery girl. She had learned long ago, people with shallow eyes often miss the deepest truths. Still, the cruelty stung. She moved toward an empty corner near the gallery wall, giving herself space. The event pulsed on. Music, laughter, a wave of artificial excitement, but it all faded into background noise, until she heard a name, not hers, his. Luca Monroe just arrived, someone whispered. A ripple swept through the room. Phones went up, heads turned. Editors whispered. Designers straightened their posture. Even the critics, the ones who had spent the evening deciding who belonged and who did not, now leaned forward. Because Luca Monroe was not just a designer, he was a disruptor. His brand had single-handedly redefined luxury techwear. He had rejected the runway system and still sold out every season. The fashion world admired him, feared him, and obsessed over his mystery. And he had just walked in, tall, deliberate, and immaculately dressed in a matte black tailored jacket. Luca didn't glance at the photographers or the VIP guests. He scanned the room once, then found her. His entire expression changed. Every eye followed him as he walked, past celebrities, past buyers, past the industry's elite, straight to Isla. She looked up, her shoulders relaxing. "You made it." He smiled as if the rest of the room had disappeared. Wouldn't miss it. And then, with one hand gently on her back, he turned to face the crowd. That's when the murmurs began to shift. That's when they realized. The woman in the plain dress was his, and the outfit they had mocked was his work, not an archived sample, not a PR prototype, a one-of-one piece he had designed just for her. The people who had spent the night sneering were now silent, because when Luca Monroe stood beside Isla, proud, unashamed, deliberate, they understood. They had not mocked a mistake. They had mocked a masterpiece. Luca's presence changed the energy in the room instantly. The laughter faded. The whispers shifted. All eyes, once filled with mockery, now brimmed with quiet confusion and rising embarrassment. The fashion elite who had spent the evening dissecting her outfit were now dissecting their silence. Isla stood beside him, still wearing the same quiet smile. She did not say a word. She did not need to. Luca gently adjusted the fall of her sleeve, the way only someone who knew every stitch of the garment would. Then he turned to a well-known designer nearby and said casually, "Clean lines. Zero embellishment. No waste. It's part of the private capsule." The woman blinked. "The capsule collection?" Luca nodded. "The one I've only made 5 pieces from. This is the first." Now it clicked. This wasn't an off-brand look. This wasn't an outdated cut or forgotten sample. This was the first reveal of an unreleased collection, the kind of work every magazine would fight to cover, every celebrity would beg to wear. The room stilled. A major fashion editor stepped forward, notebook in hand, voice softer than before. "Luca, may I ask, is this piece hers?" He turned toward Isla with pride in his eyes. "Every inch of it." There was a pause. Then, "She's not just wearing the look, she is the look." And suddenly, the tone of the room changed. Photographers lifted their cameras. Influencers began opening their apps. Brands whispered to reps. The same people who had ridiculed Isla just an hour earlier were now desperate to photograph her, to ask her name, to attach themselves to the very elegance they had mocked. But Luca raised a hand. "No photos," he said calmly. This was not a press reveal. This was personal. The air dropped again, not in tension, but in humility. "I made this piece for my wife," he said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, "because she does not need to wear labels to matter, and because her strength, her stillness, and her elegance, that's the collection." The quiet was louder than any applause. Luca turned to Isla again. "I watched you walk through this room with more grace than any person here. You didn't need to say a word to command it." She smiled gently. "I almost left." "I'm glad you didn't," he said, "because now they know." And they did. Every single person who had judged her, dismissed her, whispered behind her back, now understood that the most expensive dress in the room was the one they overlooked. Not because it glittered, but because it meant something. Suddenly, Isla's silence was no longer seen as insecurity, but power. The same outfit that made them laugh now made them pause. And the woman they thought didn't belong now owned the moment, not through vengeance, not through confrontation, but through quiet, undeniable truth. The rest of the gala passed in a blur, not for Isla, but for everyone else. People approached with softened eyes and quieter tones. Compliments flowed now, but none of them felt sincere. The same voices that had mocked her earlier now praised her elegance, her refined minimalism, her confidence. Isla nodded politely, but she did not linger. She knew what this was. Admiration born not of recognition, but revelation, and she would not trade their sudden approval for the peace she felt before they even knew her name. As the evening ended, Luca guided her toward the exit, his hand resting gently on the small of her back. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I'm fine," she said, smiling. "They just reminded me that grace still confuses people who chase attention." He laughed softly. "You confuse them because you don't need them." She looked at him, eyes warm. "I never have." Outside, the car waited. As they stepped in, Isla glanced back once through the tall glass windows. The ballroom still shimmered. The lights still sparkled. The people still posed. But something had shifted, and it had nothing to do with a name or a price tag. It had to do with a lesson they would remember long after the music stopped. Back at home, Isla changed into an old t-shirt and pajama pants. Luca brought her a cup of tea and kissed her forehead. She was no longer a woman being watched. She was simply herself again, where she had always been strongest. And somewhere, hanging carefully in their closet, was the dress that had caused a stir, not because of its label, but because of the woman who wore it. She never posted a single photo from the event. She never corrected anyone, never called out the whispers, never exposed the mockery, because Isla Monroe did not need a viral moment to prove her worth. The fashion world had learned something that night, not about trends or tailoring or collections, but about perception, about how quickly people judge what they do not recognize, and how wrong they often are. They saw a simple dress and assumed simplicity, but they missed the story behind every stitch, the designer's intention, the quiet love, the bold defiance of excess. Because real elegance does not need validation. Real strength does not ask permission. And real class? It speaks loudest when it says nothing at all. Have you ever been underestimated because of how you looked? Or watched someone rise in a room where they were first dismissed? Tell us in the comments. Your story might be the reminder someone else needs right now. If this story spoke to you, subscribe, tap the bell, and stay connected with us. Because here, we celebrate more than just appearances. We honor the quiet power behind them. Until next time, be kind, be calm, and never let the world measure your worth by what you wear.